Okay, this video is a tough one. I'm going to try my best, but I know that it's going to be a little bit controversial. If you disagree with me, agree with me, whatever, please leave a comment and we can talk about it more and open up that conversation, because that's something that I'm trying to do. I'm trying to make these conversations okay so that people feel like they can actually talk about it and be open, and that this stuff doesn't need to be hidden away and never touched ever. So today I wanted to talk about postnatal depression. It's a big topic, and sometimes I wonder if there isn't an element of postnatal depression for every single person that has a child. Now, I am very, very open and quite candid about how polarizingly messy raising children can be and how utterly horrendous the experience can be in terms of from a mental health perspective, as well as completely joyous and wonderful at the same time. And I find it interesting that even in saying that, I felt like, oh, I must mention the good stuff too, because there is this worry that you cannot be open about how hard it really is without backing that up by saying, but also I love them to pieces and it is also wonderful and there are lovely moments. Don't get me wrong, there are, but wonderful moments don't take away from how absolutely horrendously difficult parenting is and how much of a toll it can take on your mental health. I guess by making this video, I wanted to encourage other people to feel able to talk and also to help people to feel like they're not alone. To tell you a bit of my own experience, when my first child was born, I suffered from postnatal depression. And at the time I was living about 2 hours away from any kind of family whatsoever. My husband went back to work, after the standard 2 weeks paternity or whatever, he went back to work, left me on my own with a screaming child. I had no idea what I was doing, but even if you've never changed a nappy before, you can work it out. You can work out how to dress a baby, how to feed a baby, how to bath a baby. You find coping mechanisms in terms of how to get the baby to sleep. You can work out how to manage the physical stuff of looking after a baby. That hard bit is not what I'm talking about. It's interesting that when you're pregnant, everyone kind of goes, oh, yeah, get as much sleep now as you can, because that's going to go out the window. Like the worst thing is lack of sleep, and it really isn't. Like the worst thing about children is the entire loss of your identity, the entire loss of any kind of sanity that you ever thought you had, and the total weight of responsibility and the total weight of guilt and shame and fear that you could possibly ever imagine, all being jumbled up along with some of the most wonderful moments you will ever experience. What turns into, I'm not going to say that it happens when they're born, because sometimes it doesn't, but what turns into the most love you can possibly imagine and a connection that I can't even explain. And I'm getting emotional thinking about it. So basically, you have kids and it's a mess. What I found really, really hard was that I looked at other parents and everybody else seemed to be coping fine. And I felt like I was the only person in the universe that didn't have a clue what I was doing. And I don't mean that in terms of not knowing how to look after a baby. I meant I didn't have a clue what I was doing with my life. Like, I looked at my child and I loved her so much, but I just thought, oh my God, why am I being a parent? This is too hard. I've chosen this life, but this is just unimaginably difficult. Like, what am I doing? And I found it so difficult, that comparison, because other parents would turn up at baby groups. They'd just talk to each other about how much they were enjoying their children, and they never seemed to have the same kind of concerns or worries or issues that I did. And in the main, I felt like I blundered through. And I think a lot of parents do that. In fact, I know now, having spoken to a lot of parents, that a lot of parents do that. And a lot of parents do compare. Usually the issue is on social media, people only post their best days. So they look at parents on their best days and they're looking at it on one of their worst days and wondering why they just want to put their child down and walk out the room. And I felt like that a lot when my daughter was very, very young. No space was enough. You know, I couldn't manage all of those feelings that arrived when she was born, all of that responsibility, such a weight of guilt. Like I said, I couldn't even manage how much I loved her. Like, it terrified me, and nobody talked about it. And I suppose as the kids have got older as well, the issues have changed that you deal with. You know, you're not dealing with a baby that won't sleep. You're not dealing with a baby that's teething. You're not dealing with those things, but you're dealing with bigger issues, you know, or just different issues. And nobody really talks about how some days you survive. You get through the day and you have to give yourself a massive pat on the back because you've got through the day. And I remember that going to baby groups became so difficult that I retreated into myself massively. I wouldn't socialise. I barely left the house. I had such a relief when my child napped. You know, that relief that she was napping and I could just breathe because that responsibility wasn't on me anymore, meant that I stuck to routine like no tomorrow. Because if I stuck to the routine, I knew when she was going to go to sleep, and that meant that I could have that space to just be without feeling all of that weight. And I firmly believe that had I been more supported by professionals, by other mums, then maybe I wouldn't have felt like it was just me going through that. And what I would say is that there seems to be a lot of blogs and stuff that are now being more open, but they will also, you know, put in there, but we love them though. You know, sometimes it's awesome. Don't forget, sometimes it's awesome. And sometimes it's really hard for me to fully put into words how low you can get and why. Because on the surface, looking after a child or raising a child doesn't seem like it should be that hard. And in terms of the physical looking after a child, it really isn't. Mentally, I have never in my life felt more emotionally drained, at times felt like more of a failure as a human being, and felt more stress and frustration than I have ever felt during times of parenting. And it's because children are tiny balls of energy that just react, and the responsibility of a parent to manage their own reactions and their own emotions while this ball of energy is just pure reaction to everything, like a tiny nuclear bomb, is so hard. And I find it interesting that there are comedians that will make light of these very big situations. It still doesn't quite hit home that these are experiences that everybody is having. I think it's Malcolm McIntyre does a really good sketch on this about how before you have children and you want to leave the house, you just go, shall we leave the house? And you get up and you leave. And when you have children, it's, shall we leave the house? Yes, but get your shoes, get your coat, your zip won't do up. Where's your socks? You know, like all of this kind of stuff about leaving the house. And everybody laughs because it's really funny. And the reason why it's really funny is because as parents, we've all been there when you're trying to get the kids out of the house. And it's the most frustrating thing ever, trying to get shoes on, hats on, coats on, get out of the bloody house. You know, when before you had children, you could just get up and walk out the house. And I find it really interesting that we all laugh and joke about it, but we don't seriously sit with each other and say, oh my God, just trying to get out of the house today was such a nightmare. I just wanted to leave her. I just wanted to shut the door and go, right, if you're not leaving, bye, I'm out, you know, like, and that's the reality. The reality is that there is so much shame around what it could mean if a parent was actually honest. There is so much shame put around that if you are not loving being a parent all the time, because ultimately we should be so grateful that we are able to have children, and I am so grateful, but being grateful doesn't mean that it isn't really bloody hard sometimes because of the stigma, because of the fear that you'll be labelled as a bad parent. People don't talk about how much pain they're in, and they don't let that out to appropriate people. You know, they don't speak to other parents about how hard they're finding things. They don't get support. They definitely don't speak to professionals, because what if they think you're a bad parent and then they take your children away? And I have been that mum who didn't want to leave her house for fear of being judged and because it was too hard. You know, I've been that mum whose kid has gone nuts in a supermarket and everyone has stared at me thinking that I was the worst parent in the whole universe. And sometimes you don't get it right. And I remember before having a child, seeing that mum in the supermarket and thinking, I would never do that. I wouldn't manage that way. And then you learn that, you know, that mum that day has just had it up to here, you know, and that's the final straw where they will have to pick up that child screaming and just walk out of the supermarket and leave their trolley there because they've just had enough. And I feel like there is such a fear of being labelled as this bad parent that we only ever paint the good stuff and actually we stop being real parents. And it's when you hide things away that ultimately you end up with problems, because we know that, you know, talking helps, letting people in helps, seeking support helps. And I'm sure that there are parents that find it more of a calling than I did. I very much parent in my own way, and I'm at a point now where there aren't a huge amount of people that can tell me otherwise in terms of parenting. And I also think something that I wanted to mention in this video was that during my degree studies, there was a section where we discussed postnatal depression and the impact that can have on children. And I got really angry. And the reason why I got really angry is that obviously psychology is a science, which means it's very numbers based and it's very based on research. And absolutely there is a load of research into postnatal depression and why that's so horrendous for children and the long-term impacts that will have on children in various ways and shapes and forms. And it drove me absolutely crazy because it very much put all of the blame on parents completely and on mums specifically, because so much of this research is into the mother relationship with children. And it basically blamed them completely when actually postnatal depression, I often think, is not a result of anything that parent has done. I firmly believe that postnatal depression is a result of a huge lack of support for new mums. It's a result of a lack of open discussion about parenting and what it is, how difficult it is before you have a child. It's a lack of awareness of what is about to basically hit you like a flipping truck when that child arrives. And it is also a result of fear of failure, fear of stigma, and all of your past experiences, either with your own parents growing up and your experiences or with other kind of authority figures during your life, will all influence how you think you should parent, and that will impact you in terms of postnatal depression. So getting postnatal depression is not as simple as getting a diagnosis of postnatal depression after having a baby and then that being the parent's fault. And what really wound me up about this from a psychology point of view was that they've done all this research and it was very much painted out like, if the mother has postnatal depression, this is the impacts. And it wasn't, if we don't support mothers and they end up with postnatal depression. Glennon Doyle in her book Untamed uses a great analogy, and she uses it in context of something else, but I'm going to use it in context here. So we do a lot of pulling people out of the river. You know, there's a lot of, oh, she's got postnatal depression, we'll treat her, we'll give her this treatment. And there is support available if you get postnatal depression. And there isn't looking at how they got pushed in the river in the first place. There isn't looking at the support before they got postnatal depression. There isn't looking at the support for new mums. There isn't looking at stopping this maternal sainthood figure that is portrayed in media of all mums. You know, we've all seen it. These baby adverts where the baby's dressed in white and the carpet is white and everything is glowing and there's sunflowers around and the mother is breastfeeding with absolutely no pain whatsoever, which is just what? You know, we've all seen this. I find that really, really difficult because I can see why so many people end up keeping all of this stuff in instead of feeling safe. So this video has been quite difficult for me to film because it's a bit of a mess, and lots of my videos will be a mess anyway because human behaviour is messy. That's just kind of how it is. And I guess it's more of a rambly thing, and it does link quite heavily in with my What I Wish I Knew Before I Became a Parent video. I wish I'd given that a shorter title now. But all I would say is I can guarantee you that if you are having bad thoughts, and I use this because I don't believe that any thought is bad, they're just thoughts and feelings. None of them is any worse than the other. I would encourage you to see if there is a safe space where you may be able to be open with someone. And I remember actually when I was feeling really, really low and I felt like I was on my own, I remember speaking to my own mum, and I just broke down and I said to her, "You did so well, you were the perfect mum and I'm failing." And my mum said, "No, that's not what happened. You know, you went to bed, we had a glass of wine, you know, like it was really bloody hard." But if I'd never felt able to have that conversation, I would have carried on comparing how badly I thought I was doing with how well I thought my mum had done from my child perspective. And often the stories that we tell ourselves are not the real situation that's happening. Bear that in mind. When you are in baby groups and everybody else looks like they've got their shit together, I can guarantee you that they don't. There is no manual for parenting. Everybody does things differently. And it's about realising where your safe spaces are to be able to be honest and open, and where you're going to get support. And I know that that's not easily done. But anyway, I've rambled on for long enough, so I'm going to say that I hope wherever you are, you're keeping safe and well. Please don't forget to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel, and I will catch you guys in the next one.